Joining us now is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison. Chairman, thank you very much for joining us. Congratulations on a successful convention last week. We want to get into fundraising and those comments on abortion as well. But I want to start by this news over the weekend with Donald Trump floating the idea that he may not have a debate with Vice President Harris at all because he doesn't like ABC News and their politics, says that they're biased. How much of a disappointment would that be to the Harris campaign if the vice president does not get a chance to debate Donald Trump on television before the American people for this election?
Well, I think it's a huge disappointment for the American people because they want to see these two folks on the debate stage talking about the issues that are important to the American people. You know, we made clear in our convention that this is about our fundamental freedoms. All those things are on the ballot. We know what Donald Trump's Project 2025 is all about really going after those freedoms and the rights and the basic level of infrastructure we have to protect the most vulnerable in our society. There's a full frontal attack coming from the other side. And so those things need to be discussed. Those things need to be debated. And Donald Trump needs to talk about his actual agenda. It's scared to see that this former president is so scared to get on the debate stage. But I guess if I had his positions, I'd be scared to let the American people know what they worry as well.
So, Chairman Harrison, there was a bit of a tightrope the Democrats had to walk last week during the convention, saying a fond farewell, if you will, to President Biden at the top of the ticket and then pivoting to making this very clear it's all about Vice President Harris. A success by the numbers, by the ratings, by the fundraising. But talk to us about how you plan to keep that momentum going. We know the Vice President and her running mate are about to embark on a bus tour of Georgia, a state very much back in play. What else will you be doing?
Well, you know, we have, over the course of the last few weeks, or since the Vice President has been the nominee, we have seen an unprecedented number of volunteers. And this is the great thing about that. You know, volunteers are great if you have the infrastructure in order to utilize them. And for 3.5 years, we've been building just that. We have hundreds of campaign offices in our battleground states, over thousands of staffers. So we are equipped to take all of this new energy that's coming into this campaign and utilize it in terms of voter registration efforts, in terms of voter education initiatives, in terms of the voter protection programs. Unlike the Republican Party, we didn't destroy our grassroots and base operations. We built on that. The same battleground states we had in the midterms in which we beat back the red waves are the same states in which we still kept some of those staff and have been building on that for the last few years. And so I feel really, really comfortable. You're going to see a lot of grassroots energy, probably more than we've seen since the Obama 2008 campaign. And you've seen the energy. You saw it there at the convention. You saw where the vice president was able to pack a house in Chicago and to pack the same house that Donald Trump was in for the RNC in Milwaukee. That is the type of energy that we have on the ground, and it's unprecedented. And that's part of the reason why Donald Trump is scared to get on that debate stage with Kamala Harris.
Chairman Harrison, as we look at the fact that Donald Trump is now teasing that he may not show up for the debate, one question I have is, do you think the vice president ought to show up anyway and expose that he is afraid to vote her, to debate her? And that she's willing to show up and stand up. And in many ways, I think he cannot find a way to deal with this prosecutor. He's probably humiliated that the convention did much better in the ratings than his convention did. And he's one of these that is very much into looking at ratings. Her speech got a much larger ratings than his did at the Republican convention. And it was a flawless convention. One of the things that I've noted is that you as chairman and Mignon Moore, who helped put it together, have not gotten the credit you should have gotten for a flawless convention. I was there the whole convention. You certainly would have got the blame if the riots and other things that people predicted had happened.
Well, on that last note, Rev, you know, Mignon and I were just doing our black jobs. You know, we were just getting it done. But much credit goes to Mignon Moore, to Alex Hornbrook, Stephanie Cutter, and the convention. They did a wonderful job, and I'm really, really pleased by how it went off. You know, when you look at it, you know, Kamala Harris has been getting bigger crowds than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris has been getting more volunteers than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris has been getting better ratings than Donald Trump's, raised more money than Donald Trump, and we are going to win this race. And he's scared about that. He's scared, to be beaten by this woman, this black woman who is so capable and so intelligent, and is probably the most equipped person to be president of the United States, walking on the face of this earth. And so we're going to continue to press the case. We're going to continue to run as if we're down. We're going to continue to go all around this country, making sure that our message of freedom and joy and hope is resonant, but also that, you know, we are committed to making America great for all of America's people. And we know that America's greatness isn't in her past, but it's in her future. And so, Rev, that's the commitment that you will see from this campaign. We're not going to let up. And I can understand why Donald Trump would be afraid. If you saw those type of numbers and you saw those type of crowds, I'd be afraid too. But this, you know, the folks in this country are hungry for positivity. They're hungry for hope and joy, not for fear and bigotry and hatred and division. And that's what they're getting from the other side.
Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, thank you, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you all. Good morning.
Joining us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, Boston Globe senior opinion writer Kimberly Atkins-Storr, Republican strategist Susan Del Percio, and former campaign manager for President Obama's 2012 re-election, Jim Mesita, are all here to chew over this. All right, Gabe, what's going on? Because I read just a moment ago the debate's back on. Is it back on?
Well, it technically was never off. Former President Trump just made it seem like it could be off. You know, look, the debate over the debate, as you put it, escalated last night when he posted on social media about what he called a biased interview on ABC and suggested he might skip the debate. So he was asked about it this morning, which he just played. There is a separate issue here, though, which is that the Harris campaign wants hot mics the entire debate. In other words, they don't want the mics to be muted when the other candidate is speaking. And that is the opposite of what President Biden's team had wanted during the first debate in Atlanta. Now, you might remember they wanted the mics shut off to sort of rein in Donald Trump. And now the argument is reversed, it seems. The Harris campaign releasing this statement overnight. The vice president is ready to deal with Trump's constant lies and interruptions in real time. Trump should stop hiding behind the mute button. Now, for its part, Katie, the Trump campaign says it is the Harris campaign that's trying to change the rules by asking for opening statements, a seated debate, and the ability to refer to notes. The Harris campaign, though, is flatly denying asking for any of that, and Trump this morning seemed to go against his campaign statement by saying that he'd rather the mic stay on. Look, bottom line, at this point, it's devolved into quite the back and forth, with the debate less than 2.5 weeks away. You know, Katie, you know, I was thinking, what if we had a nonpartisan organization that could sort all of this out, that could provide a time-tested format that was consistent and agreed to by both campaigns? Maybe we could call it something like the Commission on Presidential Debates or something like that.
You know, I think that's a really great idea. The problem with the president on the Commission on Presidential Debates, though, is they always had an audience. I don't want an audience at these things. I do like the idea of having it just in a studio solo, so you don't have to hear the crowds cheering and clapping or booing when they're asked not to. It takes away from the content. All right. Jim, is it a good idea to let Donald Trump loose, have him on hot mic? What is the thinking behind that from the Harris team?
Oh, absolutely, Katie, because the truth is, the more this race is about Donald Trump, the more people remember why they didn't like him in the first place. And I kind of get it from the Trump campaign. They're like, look, you know, we can't make this about Donald Trump because after 3 presidential elections, everyone has an opinion about Donald Trump. We have to try to go define Kamala Harris. And the worst way to do that is have Donald Trump saying crazy stuff all over the national networks. So I'd want a mute button if I was them, too. But the Harris campaign absolutely wants people to see Donald Trump in his actual real live environment and see all the crazy things he's likely going to want to say. So once again, you have a Harris campaign that is just playing Major League Baseball with a Trump campaign that is fighting in front of the national networks with their candidate. I mean, these guys can't shoot straight. They're sitting on their couches wanting to kind of go crazy, Katie, as their candidate says absolutely nutty things 71 days before the election.
Susan, is it still effective for Donald Trump to be calling people names? He's calling, ABC anchors names. He's insulting Kamala Harris's IQ. He continues to do it. Did it just a few minutes ago on his Truth Social. Is this still effective for him?
No, and it's hurt him in the past, and it'll continue to hurt him. First of all, he can't even settle on something to call Vice President Harris. He can't get his arms around the fact that he's even running against her. So he's been all over the place and on his heels, which is why I think we see so much of this flip-flopping on the debate issue. Yes, I want an open mic. No, I don't want an open mic. I do want to have it. ABC's not good. It is good. He doesn't know what to do. And I think this is the first time we've really seen him have a problem defining the other candidate down to ugly nicknames.
Okay, let's move on to something a little bit more substantial. This was Meet the Press this weekend. My colleague Kristen Welker asking J.D. Vance about whether a new Trump administration, if he does win, would separate families. Let's listen.
Will families be separated under your mass deportation policy?
I think that families are currently being separated, and you're certainly going to have to deport some people in this country. Now, I think you start
that's a yes?
with what Kamala Harris says is that Donald Trump wants to separate families. Kamala Harris's policies have led to thousands upon thousands of migrant children living with sex traffickers and drug cartels.
Well,
that is the consequence of her policies.
But there's not a policy to separate families. There's not a policy to separate families.
The question is, know that your policies will lead to family separation, you don't get to claim. Kristen, this is important. Kamala Harris cannot claim that she doesn't know that her policies are leading to family separation. They are, and everybody knows it, and she has to take responsibility.
So we're really dodging that question. My colleague Jacob Soboroff asked Don Jr. about that at the convention. I asked Eric Trump a version of it when he was on my show at the convention. This mass deportation policy that the Republicans want to institute, they had signs with it at their convention. There are a lot of mixed families in this country where some people have legal status and others do not. Kimberly, what did you think of J.D. Vance's effort to turn it right back around on the Harris team?
Yeah, I think that he was trying to dodge the inconvenient truth that not only does the platform that he stands for, as you pointed out, call for mass deportations and doesn't in the previous Trump administration had a zero tolerance policy for separating children. And it's also laid out in Project 2025 that the Biden-Harris administration has actually slowed the separation of families while at the same time cutting back dramatically on border crossings and even asylum cases. They're hearing fewer asylum cases, not just accepting fewer asylum cases, and that has led to a dramatic drop in illegal border crossings. The Republicans love the issue of immigration and campaigning on it, but voters want a solution to the immigration system overall and don't want to do it in an inhumane way. And because the Biden administration has actually made headway in that through executive action, it's very difficult for them to try to make that case against them without double speaking and misstating facts the way that J.D. Vance did.
But the Republicans, Jim, as you know, poll better on immigration. They're talking about their solution is to deport everybody. The Democrats' argument is that they wanted legislation on this. This is something that has to be fixed on the congressional level. There's got to be a new policy at the border. And they came up with a bipartisan policy that President Biden said he was going to sign. They've said this. They try to emphasize that point. But when you look at the polls, Donald Trump still has an edge. Why do the Republicans continue to have an edge on immigration?
because historically Democrats haven't wanted to talk about it. And I agree with Kimberly. Republicans are now a little bit on the defense on this, Katie, because they have to defend voting against the bill you just talked about. And now they have to defend separating kids. I was watching focus groups in Arizona and Nevada over the weekend, and Latino voters went straight to this child issue and said, look, we agree we need to have a tougher border. We agree with Trump, but you cannot separate kids here. That's ridiculous. And then it's clear he's just playing politics. So what was once a clear-cut winner for the Republicans has now become more of a problem as J.D. Vance spent minute after minute on the defense with Kristen Welker. I think, they've started to screw this issue up. But to your point, Democrats have got to talk about it. Democrats have got to go straight at it and not pretend it's not an issue, because this is an issue swing voters care about.
The first voting in key states begins in just 21 days, and the first Harris-Trump debate is actually scheduled for 15 days from now. So tonight we will be looking down the road to these big campaign events. We also have Professor Michael Eric Dyson and Jelani Cobb coming up this hour. The Democrats' new musical star, DJ Cassidy, will also join us by the end of the hour. So I invite you to get comfortable. We have a lot cooking for you. Right now we begin with new signs that Kamala Harris is gaining momentum from the DNC. All the speeches delivered, all the balloons dropped, all the points made and hammered home again. And the political question then becomes this week how this convention is or is not shaping the race. Well, we know more about that as we begin the week. Trump's convention, of course, was his first speech since narrowly avoiding that horrific assassination. There was huge interest going into the RNC, and it did draw an audience, but the DNC, we can now tell you, narrowly beat the RNC in the total traditional TV audience, with 28 million plus viewers watching Harris's finale speech. That is high. That is big interest. And that means that while you may follow the news or listen to Harris pretty regularly, we now know, and we can tell you this today as a fact, more people heard her last week than any time since October 2020. That's the last time she had that large a live TV audience, and it was during the debate with Mike Pence. There are also signs that Harris and the convention's key points reached tens of millions more people through streaming and social media. I've mentioned this to you before. If we are going to understand our world as it changes, we need to track how it's changing. And so linear TV, as they call it, still matters. Newspapers still matter. Traditional interviews still matter. I'm not telling you it's all been replaced, but a whole lot of people and younger voters tend to get their information elsewhere. And Democrats, as you see on the screen, may be opening up an edge on Republicans here with 21 million plus separate views in online streams. So if you take it all together, you're talking about tens and tens of millions of people who saw some of the DNC, which means what happened in Chicago may not stay in Chicago. It may be shaping the national race. In other words, here is what people are still talking about.
Our best days are not behind us, they're before us.
This convention has always been pretty good to kids with funny names who believe in a country where anything is possible.
Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
Let's all choose Kamala Harris. It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
This convention stands a good chance to be on that very small list of significant moments in modern American history.
That whole convention, just amazing.
Democratic officials, delegates, the activists, all clearly enthused. And as you heard there, some historians, other independent observers have noted that whatever your politics, this was an effective and energetic program. It showcased as well governors making a clear case against Trump.
Hear me on this. It sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he gets to pick the winner. That's not freedom.
Take it from an actual billionaire. Trump is rich in only one thing: stupidity.
Like women across America, we just GSD. Get stuff done.
So that's some of what was said, what you may have heard if you followed it. Political conventions, though, are also stories. And that means, like any big or good story, it matters how they end. And the RNC began effectively. High stakes, as I mentioned, over the return of Donald Trump after the horrific shooting. Apparent unity for him in that crowd, which was a contrast to the Republicans' very divided 2016 convention. But the RNC ended poorly, with Trump giving a long speech that even Fox News viewers turned off as it stretched past 90 minutes. We have the data. Even Republican operatives conceded that was an unforced error. And so it started big, ended at least mediocre. This DNC, however, ended with a political climax. Harris landing her speech, the DNC drawing the most viewers that night, as I mentioned, and a massive show of support continuing, pouring out from party activists. Harris has now raised $82 million during the DNC week alone. Her total haul now over $500 million in 1 month. Harris has also used these campaign events and last week as a kind of proof of concept. Remember, we all were there 5-6 weeks ago when Democratic candidates, especially in tough districts, were fleeing Joe Biden as a campaign figure. Now they want in on this campaign. They're excited about it, Axios reports, noting an army of House surrogates that are emerging. Democrats are going on offense this week in Georgia. That's the kind of state they would like to win, but would not need to win for Harris to take the Electoral College if they hold the blue wall. An effective convention also dominates the larger conversation. Many think that's happening as Trump has remained visibly on defense for days. His own former aides note that he's phoning it in. That's their term, that he's become low energy and undisciplined. It feels as if he's lost his mojo, said the Trump White House vet. Now, mojo, as Austin Powers will tell you, or momentum in political terms, is infamously difficult to measure. By the way, as we showed you in some of those highlights, Democrats still insist that they're either down a bit or at best tied. The campaigning is also certainly about inviting everyone in, and that means sharing who you are, who you want to be, and making room for people, for having fun. It can even help to be cool. Sure, it certainly doesn't hurt. And the convention also showed that.
Turn out for what? In the words of the great Steph Curry, we can tell Donald Trump, night, night.
Go vote. Be active. Let's show out in November like never before.
I guess Donald Trump will finally know what it's like when you get left for a younger woman.
First you say comma like a comma in a sentence. Then you say la like la 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 la.
Put it together and it's 1, 2, 3, Kamala.
Those are just some of the moments that you might recall. Many of them landed because they were real. They were planned for an audience and a purpose, of course, but kind of like a wedding toast, people can tell if someone prepared it and then shared something authentic or did something else. Now, you may have heard people say sometimes, okay, well, this isn't a popularity contest, which is actually funny because it sort of is. I mean, Donald Trump famously took the Electoral College in 2016 by doing something that you could imagine working in a certain kind of high school type popularity contest. He was a vulgar bully. People knew that. It was seen and exposed. But he was a bully who convinced enough people that he sort of represented something, that his type of defiance and rule breaking might be good for them, good for the country, bad for the swamp. It was an us and them thing. And yes, I'm simplifying. But it was a bully who could win a type of popularity contest once. Since then, the voters have not rushed back to the MAGA Republican Party. Not in 2018, not in 2020 when they booted Trump, and not in 2022 when the Biden-Harris administration beat long-standing trends that run against incumbents. This Harris convention appears to have legs, as they say, momentum, mojo, appears to be lasting precisely because it fits into that larger debate without what had become the gravitational political pull of Joe Biden, a man who had maybe met his moment, but also outlasted his moment. which is not necessarily a bad thing for him as a person, but is a thing that the country was processing. The Harris Convention offering a different type of path to popularity, to even a type of populism that is, yes, proudly progressive, not apologetic, that is about freedom, that is about inclusion, and it was also, believe it or not, about having a good time. And we are joined by Jelani Cobb from The New Yorker and Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia and Chief Creative and Content Officer for the Daily Beast and longtime international journalist Joanna Coles. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Popularity contest or not, was that a party people want to join? Does it matter in the weeks ahead, or does it just sort of fade away, the convention?
No, I mean, I think there are a few things that are at play here. One is, a very kind of subtle strategic thing that they did very early on, which is that everyone has been saying, that Donald Trump poses a serious threat, and so on people on the Democratic side of things, and they've been talking about him in these, stern, grave voices. And Kamala said he's an unserious person. Represents a serious threat, but he's an unserious person and has proceeded to campaign with the kind of effusive joy and happiness, the kind of happy warrior. The people who, follow boxing, know, you'd always see like the guy who's getting in the ring who looks furious and like angry and just he wants to tear someone apart. And that's not the guy you worry about. You worry about the person who gets in the ring happy, the person who's like, I finally get to do the thing that I'm good at. And so what really, I think, will dictate this is the tone, if she carries that tone into the debates with him, which I could see, that being a kind of microcosm of the awkwardness, the kind of flustered quality that he's had ever since she entered the race.
Am I the only person that found the DNC 2 days too long? We covered it in myopic detail at the Daily Beast. We really did. But by the fourth night...
Everything in American politics is too long.
I know, it's too long. In Europe, we would have gone through 4 cycles of elections by now, just since the DNC. I just found it far too long. And really, when they're bringing out every B celebrity... And you're like, either it's Beyonce or bust. I just needed the Obamas, maybe a little bit of Oprah, always a good thing. And then, obviously, her speech, and Tim Walz and Gus. Gus Waltz, what a star. The internet was on fire for him. He was extraordinary. So I do think we've been introduced to a new array of characters, which feels very exciting. I think people are very bored, and we're clearly very bored at the prospect of Biden and Trump, the rematch. And now we have an entirely new set of characters, which I'm very excited about. But I think in 4 years' time, I would advise the Democrats to shrink it by 50%.
Focused on Georgia, they got new energy when the vice president took over. Senator Warnock, as you know, gave an incredible speech at the convention, and Senator Ossoff is there, as well as Lucy McBath and a bunch of other folks. We really think that we have a chance to win to Georgia, and they're going to compete there in a very hard way. And we're going to make Donald Trump defend every ounce of ground in America.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. And let's just say Georgia is on their mind. The Harris-Walz campaign making it clear that they are fired up, ready to recapture Georgia's electoral votes, just like President Biden did in 2020, when he turned the state blue for the first time in nearly 30 years. The battleground state of Georgia will be the first stop for Vice President Harris and her running mate Tim Walz, following last week's blockbuster Democratic National Convention. On Wednesday, the two will kick off a bus tour in South Georgia. The campaign noting, quote, this part of the Peach State represents the diverse coalition that makes up the Harris-Walz coalition, including rural, suburban, and urban Georgians, with a large proportion of black voters and working-class families. This visit to Georgia marks Harris's second visit to the state since launching her campaign just a month ago. She will hold a solo rally in Savannah Thursday night following that bus tour. Meanwhile, we know Georgia, very important to her opponent, Donald Trump. When he lost the state in 2020, he tried to strong-arm Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger into finding just the right amount of votes he needed to win. But this time around, Democrats are having to fight even harder as Republicans in Georgia are trying to rig the system in their favor. 3 Republicans on the state's election board have been attempting to change voting rules just months before early voting begins, like their approval of a new rule that would make it easier to delay the certification of election results. Their attempts, so brazen, the governor is now asking the attorney general for guidance on whether he has the authority to remove members of the board. That's according to reporting by our friend at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein. These dangerous efforts underscoring the need for Democrats to rally Georgians and protect American democracy. A message we heard from Senator Raphael Warnock at the DNC.
Behind the big lie was an even bigger lie. It is the lie that this increasingly diverse American electorate does not get to determine the future of the country. The lie and the logic of January 6th is a sickness. It is a kind of cancer that then metastasized into dozens of voter suppression laws all across our country. And we must be vigilant tonight because these anti-democratic forces are at work right now in Georgia and all across our country. And the question is, who will heal the land? And so here we are, America. Are you ready?
And that is where we start this hour with co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund, LaTosha Brown, plus political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and MSNBC political contributor Greg Bluestein, and political strategist and MSNBC senior analyst Matt Dowd. LaTosha, what do you think? Will we see Georgia turn blue again?
I certainly think that the momentum is here, the energy is here. I do think that Georgia represents a new South. It represents new voters, young voters, and a broad-based, multiracial, multi-generational coalition. And it seems like that's the group of voters that are going to make a difference this election cycle and that are excited about the top of the ticket for the Democrats. You know, I do think that the challenge, though, what we know is where there's progress, there's always backlash. And so what we're seeing is we're actually seeing an effort, I believe, under those that are in power in the state to really try to change that. Not if you can't affect by bringing more voters, having a platform that is creative enough to bring more voters to their party. Instead, what they're going to do is really try to do three things: disenfranchise, disrupt, and disqualify the vote. So that's why we're seeing these laws that are dealing with certification and certification of the results.
All right, Greg, let's take this in two parts, as LaTosha just laid it out for us. How are Dems feeling about Georgia at the moment? Last month, you said they were no longer despondent about their chances with Harris at the top of the ticket. What are you hearing from them now?
Well, they're exuberant. And one reason is why this bus tour. Look, it's one thing for the vice president to make Georgia a priority so close to the convention. It's another thing where she's going. Most Democratic presidential contenders hardly leave Metro Atlanta. She'll be going to places in South Georgia, including in Savannah, Georgia, where Democratic presidential candidates almost never go. And that's to drive home a point to Republicans. Look, in some of these counties, Republicans were expected to drive up the margins and win by a huge amount. She's hoping to cut those margins enough so that Metro Atlanta, if there's a big victory there, it helps float her and carry her throughout the rest of the state.
Greg, I invoked you in my introduction to this story. Talk about your reporting. What's been happening with Republicans on the Georgia State Election Board?
Yeah, there's a 5-member state election board that just had a 1-member leave who was more mainstream and was replaced by a more MAGA Republican. Since then, there's been a number of rules changes that even some mainstream Republicans are opposing. Even Governor Kemp's top advisor today expressed some caution about those changes. And the governor is asking the attorney general to weigh in on whether or not he has the authority, the legal authority, to remove some of these members, including one who might have a conflict of interest because he has openly sought a job with the Trump administration if Trump wins in November.
One of the reasons, Matt Dowd, I wanted to make sure that we began the show with Georgia is that I think it lays out so many of the dynamics we're going to see nationally with this race. Yes, there's incredible enthusiasm for the Democratic ticket in Georgia. They are making a historic investment in the state. They believe it is on their map and they need to win it. And at the same time, because all of those things are true, you have Republicans trying to rejigger the rules so that if they can't beat them at the ballot box, then they will beat them with laws that have been bent in their favor. This is happening in Georgia, but it is really a window to what is happening all across this country. Matt Dowd.
Yeah, and I think Georgia's proven, I mean, one of the things that Democrats have to do is vote in such numbers that they the finagling of that rules won't have an impact on this. To me, Georgia is such a great window into this election because, one, we've seen Democrats win their 2 United States senators and Joe Biden. We also see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's the MAGAist of MAGA folks, is a congressperson from there. And we've also seen, it's interesting to me that Georgia is where more Republicans have stood up to Donald Trump than anywhere else. The Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, former lieutenant governor who spoke at the Democratic convention, who's a Republican, endorsed the vice president. And the governor of the state has stood up to Trump, who's had an on-again, off-again relationship with him. And so to me, Georgia, I mean, I think it's really smart of the Harris-Walz campaign to target it in this way. I think it's very smart to go outside of the Atlanta metro area in this. But Georgia is one of the states in the South that not only are the Democrats riled up to vote Trump out, but there is a Republican contingent in Georgia, as evidenced by the elected officials, that have stood up to Trump and succeeded.
Natasha, I saw a head nod that means that you believe the same is true. Let's listen to some of the sound from Jeff Duncan at the Democratic National Convention, and then you and I will talk about it on the other side.
I realized Donald Trump was willing to lie, cheat, and steal to try to overturn the 2020 election. I realized Trump was a direct threat to democracy, and his actions disqualified him from ever stepping foot into the Oval Office again. Let me be clear to my Republican friends at home watching. If you vote for Kamala Harris in 2024, you're not a Democrat, you're a patriot.
Natasha, I wonder how that changes your outreach efforts.
You know, I think that that's a strong statement. I think that what that says is that the party, the Republican Party, is fractured. You know, in many ways, I do think that it can create a certain level of desperation that will actually increase the disinformation and misinformation that is going towards certain communities. So on one hand, I'm actually very happy that he's taken that position. I think that was a powerful statement. I also think that it can breed a certain level of desperation on those bad actors within the Republican Party that want to see a different outcome. And we've seen that when the president in this state has asked to find 11,000 votes. And so he bumped up against a wall, but there have been legislative and administrative pieces put in place to actually marginalize the vote and change the outcome.
Greg, help me understand a dynamic here. There have been some changes in the relationship between Trump and Kemp recently. Would you say that the hatchet has been buried?
Probably not. We've seen this cycle play out over and over again. And when I spoke to a number of senior Republicans the other day, when Donald Trump kind of out of the blue said, "Thank you, Governor Kemp, for reuniting with me," most of them used the same phrase, which is house of cards. They feared any moment, any tweet, any public statement, Donald Trump could go once again attack Governor Brian Kemp. And look, that's what we saw earlier this month with his rally in Atlanta. There seemed to be nothing to set him off, nothing to ignite that. But out of the blue, there was a series of tweets and a 10-minute tirade on the stage in Atlanta when everyone in that audience, all the Republicans in that audience, just thought he'd focus on the economy or immigration. Instead, he devoted a big chunk of his speech to attacking Georgia's Republican governor.
Matt, that was a hearty laugh from you. I assume you have something you want to say?
I mean, the only way Donald Trump buries a hatchet is if it's in the back of his opponent. I mean, that's the only way he buries one in this. And I think it's important for people to realize Governor Kemp is far, far more popular than Donald Trump is in Georgia. And Governor Kemp, after Donald Trump, I think, went after his wife in the course of this, I don't think Governor Kemp is going to be, working the weekends overtime in order to make sure Donald Trump is elected. He might say he's going to vote for him, but he ain't going to stretch his muscles to get it done.
I want to bring in NBC's Garrett Haake, who covers the Trump campaign. Also joining us, MSNBC political analyst and former communications director for Jeb Bush back in 2016, Tim Miller. Here with me in studio, Democratic strategist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices, Julie Roginski. Good to have all of you here. So, Julie, what do you think's happening here?
Oh, please. They're panicking. But look, Donald Trump has been on record as saying maybe a 15-week ban is not such a bad thing. I mean, he's been going back and forth on this. He's bragged about abolishing Roe versus Wade. He appointed the 3 justices who did abolish Roe versus Wade. we don't have to listen, like to paraphrase Elvis Presley, a little less conversation, a little more action. We know what the action has been. The action has been to deprive women of their rights. J.D. Vance has been very clear about being 100% pro-life. And above and beyond that, he wouldn't even vote to uphold IVF. He wouldn't even vote to make sure that IVF was legal. This is as extreme as it gets, so I don't really take what J.D. Vance says at face value. We know what they're going to do because we know what Donald Trump has done before. Garrett, we're seeing a couple of different things about Donald Trump's messaging from members of his own party. Even Tom Cotton asked repeatedly to answer about the Trump campaign policy. Didn't want to go there. He basically put it on Kamala Harris. And I want to play for you what Lindsey Graham had to say.
What exactly is Donald Trump going to do to, quote unquote, help women's reproductive rights?
Yeah, no, you need to ask him about that.
You need to ask him about that. So what is the position?
Yeah, Chris, I'll try to ask him the next chance I get here. I mean, look, when it comes to abortion rights, Donald Trump's official position has been to kick this issue to the states. This is something that he hopes will take this issue and take some of the air out of it. He knows it's a huge motivating issue for Democrats and for women nationwide, and he and his campaign don't want it to be a deciding issue in this election. The problem with that position is it basically means he's responsible for Georgia's position or California's position or the near total abortion restriction in my home state of Texas, and he has to essentially defend all of those positions. The way he's done that is to try to wash his hands of it and say things like what he posted on Truth Social over the weekend, and this is a quote: "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." Now, to me, that's kind of like Michael Scott in The Office declaring bankruptcy. You don't just say it to make it true. There's no real specific policy background to that in any way, and I think the Trump campaign's general view of this issue is they mostly just want it to go away or to be subsumed by other issues on which he and they feel more confident going into the fall.
Tim, I thought it was fascinating. Tony Perkins, as you know, the president of the Family Research Council, reacted to that Truth Social post from Donald Trump. And this is what he wrote. "My advice is when you're in a hole, stop digging. This week made clear the DNC has the corner on the abortion market. Trump is not only suppressing his own support, he is going to hurt the vast majority of Republican candidates who are 100% pro-life. So why take this on?"
Yeah, well, I think that Tony Perkins was given some bad political advice there. I guess I think Trump, for all of his flaws, is more attuned to the political risk of the position, the extreme position that a lot of Republicans have taken in these red states, as Garrett pointed out, on the issue of abortion and the concerns about national abortion ban. Look, I mean, a lot of this is like J.D. Vance is trying to play this hypothetical game about like what would you do if a bill comes, you know, before their desk or whatever. But like the reality is, Trump going in after the overturn of Roe, after Dobbs, his entire staff would be staffed with people that Tony Perkins likes, right? And so Donald Trump is just trying to put a more palatable public face on an administration that would be very extreme in trying to pass anti-abortion policies across a number of verticals via HHS and other, you know, administrative, using other administrative functions.
I'm just trying to figure out if you think he can make any progress in terms of winning voters over for whom this issue matters. I mean, I think we can all agree that this probably doesn't have much impact on the way pro-life voters will vote. They're clearly not going to vote for Kamala Harris. So how do you make it work on the other end? Do you think people are going to buy the fact that he has not said multiple times, I got Roe v. Wade overturned. It was my Supreme Court that did that. I appointed these Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, look, there are going to be a lot of people he can never win over because of all that, Chris. And you saw this in the midterms, how big of an anchor Dobbs was for Republicans in a lot of states. The thing is, though, Donald Trump isn't trying to fool everybody. Like, he's just trying to create some space for a couple of specific categories of voters, you know, particularly younger men, for example, who are like pro-choice and would probably vote for pro-choice referenda in these states, but also prefer Donald Trump to Kamala Harris and are looking for a fig leaf to do so. Right? People who are a little less engaged, less focused, and we've all seen the viral videos of people on campuses blaming Joe Biden for the overturn of Roe v. Wade that happened under his watch. Right? There are lower info voters out there that he's trying to project to them. You don't have to be scared of me. I'm not one of these crazy far-right Christians like these others. As a policy matter, nothing's going to change, but that's what he's trying to do as a political matter.
Yeah, Julie, I was looking back in 1993. That's right when Ohio enshrined the right to reproductive abortion access to reproductive rights into their constitution. This is what J.D. Vance wrote on social media. There is something sociopathic about a political movement that tells young women and men that it is liberating to murder their own children. I don't think there's any ambiguity, right, about that statement, but to Tim's point, there are low information voters. There are voters who may care about this issue, but they're not necessarily going to vote on it. And if Donald Trump can convince even some of those that maybe for other reasons, economic reasons, border reasons, the kind of issues that we know he's leading on, that those are more important, it's a win.
Well, yes. I mean, look, there are suburban women out there who historically have voted Republican who now are voting Democrat in part because of this issue. But look, they didn't just fall off the turnip truck. This was the biggest story of the last 2 or 3 years, that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And now states have the right, including places like Pennsylvania, if they had a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, they now have the right to potentially ban abortion. Places like Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which he needs to win. Places like Northampton County that he needs to win in Pennsylvania. And so it's a problem for him because these are voters who are incredibly attuned to what's been going on in the last few years. And again, they know what Donald Trump has done. They don't need to take him at his word that he'll do something else because the record is there. Roe versus Wade is no longer the law of the land because of one man and one man only, and that is Donald Trump. He appointed those justices. Those justices overturned Roe versus Wade, and he's bragged about it, and he's said how thrilled he was about it. So why do we have to believe that anything's going to be different? And to the point that was made earlier, he's going to appoint the very people into his administration that Tony Perkins loves, that these pro-life evangelicals love, because that's who's staffing the Trump administration next time around. There's not going to be anybody to stop him.
We've got less than a minute here, Tim, but what are the states, what are among the battleground states, the places where you think that Donald Trump could, if not make progress on this issue, that it will be less impactful than in some others?
Yeah, I think about two groups in particular. One, white working class women. Kamala Harris needs to try to do a little bit better than Biden did with that group because we're post-Dobbs. And I think that she's got to convince those voters that he's a threat to their reproductive rights. And he's got to kind of convince them that they should stick with him. A lot of these are like the Obama-Trump voters, particularly women. And then the group that I mentioned before, like younger men. And Susie Wiles, the Trump campaign manager, has said she's trying to reach out to like younger black and brown men and try to gain a little ground with them. They're going to tend to be pro-choice most of all, but he's trying to convince them that he's that they shouldn't lump him in with some of the more extreme people on that issue. I think he's going to struggle with both groups, but those are, I think, the two kind of battlegrounds here.
Garrett Haake, Julie Roginski, and Tim Miller, thank you.